So, this is just a very quick snippet of a longer talk I'm giving for the Astrology Collective in Australia later on in the month. As I was creating the talk and building my slides for the talk and pulling together all my ideas and thoughts about Pluto and Pluto moving from Capricorn into Aquarius, I thought, let me look at a handful of charts pulled at random and just see if the things I'm talking about express themselves well enough in each of those persons' chart. And the first one I pulled up was Tina Turner's, and I thought that it was a really interesting chart to explore in terms of the Pluto placement. So Pluto represents our unconscious shadows in our psyches, our complexes, and shadow material in the psyches that we don't really want other people to see. But Pluto is a slow moving planet, it's a collective planet. Therefore, it represents the shadows in our collective psyche. Not just our personal psyche. And actually, I was thinking that you cannot separate the two. So, yes, where Pluto sits in your natal chart in terms of its aspects, house, sign, this kind of thing, yes, it represents your personal expression, your personal representation of some shadow material of some kind. The person, you and I, cannot be separated from the collective consciousness, or collective unconsciousness, I should say, with Pluto. So they're one and the same thing. And that got me thinking that that also means that each and every person is in some way harbors, or not necessarily embodies, but harbors or has dormant laying within them every single unconscious collective shadow that exists throughout humanity. So every single kind of shadow complex or psychological issues, emotional issues, let's say, that's really, really difficult to face, really taboo kind of stuff, exists in each and every one of us somewhere, perhaps lying dormant or as a potential for expression at some point. That's a really uncomfortable thing to think of, because if you think of the most terrible, evil people in the world and the things that they've done, they have been outwardly manifesting and expressing their shadow, unconscious shadow material, or it's become conscious and they are projecting it into the outside world. Of course, we don't want to think that we are like those people, and we are not like those people in terms of our daily consciousness and our personality. But the hardest task of Pluto is to look within really deeply and to look at the stuff that we don't want to look at. It's the darkest kind of stuff. And yes, that may be individual shadow complexes. That may be a tendency, let's say, for codependency, just as a random example. And we might not want to admit that about ourselves. We might not want to look at that about ourselves. But what Pluto is really asking us all to do on a collective level is to look deep within and to see that we all contain the seed of every single shadow and complex in the psyche that has ever been expressed in humanity. Pluto is asking us to look in the dark inwards and for us to accept and face that we all contain the seed for every piece of evil that has ever been expressed in the world. And likewise, we of course all contain the seed for every piece of love and joy that's been expressed in the world. Just to counterbalance that. But Pluto wants us to face the other side. It wants us to rebalance our perspective and for us to see that we contain both the light and the dark, and we contain the seeds for all expressions of life, including those which are abhorrent and apparently evil and dark. So this is the hard work of Pluto, is to look within and to see that facet of ourselves. And when we can all see that and we can all accept it and still love ourselves and be comfortable with this, then we will really heal and evolve. But going back to the personal expression of Pluto once again, then of course we can see our personal expression of a particular portion, let's say, of collective shadows. So I'm sure that there are many, many different types of shadows and complexes that exist in the collective, and that there's probably hundreds of them. But we represent, each of us has a Pluto in our chart, and each of us embody, more so than any of the others, one particular type of shadow or psychological complex. And Tina Turner's chart is really interesting. So she has Pluto in the 12th house. So the 12th house, in essence, and I'm going to distill this down into its most concise, simplistic form. We could get way more complicated with this. We could go into way more detail, but I'm taking it back to its bare essence, step by step. So the 12th house, in essence, can represent, in shadow form at least, victimhood. So she carries the shadow complex of victimhood very deeply within her psyche. And of course, we can see this with her marriage to Ike Turner, and that was a very abusive marriage and kept her in victimhood for a very long time. And we may then think, oh, that's terrible, poor Tina Turner. And we do think that because we have love and compassion for her and she's a human being. So we absolutely do extend our hearts to her. But at the same time, just looking at this from a Plutonic point of view, if you ask yourself the question, what does being a victim do for you? What do you get out of being a victim? Well, you still stay helpless. And that when you stay helpless, it means you don't have to take responsibility. You don't have to push yourself out of that and take responsibility for your life. You can remain helpless and therefore take the so-called easy road of requiring help, asking for help, being supported, never having to do any of those things for yourself. So this is what being a victim gives you. It puts you in the passenger seat and not the driver's seat, because there is an unconscious fear of being in the driving seat. So that's the benefit of staying in victimhood. And of course, she broke out of that, thank goodness, and had a very happy marriage after that. But initially, she spent many, many years in victimhood. And there was an unconscious desire to stay there because therefore she does not have to take responsibility for herself. We see it in the sign of Leo, which is obviously was there for a very long time. And Leo is the collective shadow of needing to be loved and adored. To be seen and heard is one aspect of Leo, but it is rather taboo, at least in England, where I live, to openly admit that you have a secret desire to be loved and adored, and seen as very special in the eyes of others, above and over others. You may feel that secretly. You may not want that to be known publicly, but you have this feeling, or perhaps Tina Turner had this feeling in her unconscious, that she wanted to be seen as special and she wanted to be adored. And again, this is in the 12th house. So this stuff is very likely unconscious for her and not easy for her to see and witness and grab hold of so that she can do something about it. And of course, again, when we look at the story of her marriage to Ike was absolutely adoring of her in a rather narcissistic way, making her feel as though she was the most special person on the planet, and then, of course, becoming violent. So she also not only holds the collective shadow of victimhood and also wanting to be a victim. And that's a very hard thing to say and might not go down very well, because we think to ourselves, well, how I never wanted that thing to happen to me. How can I want that for myself? And on a conscious level, a person doesn't want that for themselves. And in a human, heartfelt way, they are a victim. And of course, there is compassion and love and much healing for that, and much sympathy and empathy for all of those things. But deep, deep down, what Pluto's asking this person to do, Tina Turner to do, is to see that she wants to stay a victim, and she wants to be seen as particularly special and adored compared to other people, elevated above other people, and to see that in herself and accept that in herself, which is the hardest, darkest place a person could possibly go. But to remember that this shadow of wanting to be special and wanting to stay a victim is a seed in each and every one of us, so that she's not alone in that, and we all hold that collective shadow. If we go a little bit deeper, then we see that there is a sextile coming from a Gemini moon in the 10th house. I saw this feeding into that Pluto as a rather childish need to be cared for and looked after. So the moon sometimes represents the child, the inner child, and so does Gemini. and that feeding into all of those archetypal energies I've just described, then really indicates someone who has these needs, these young childlike needs, and they want to be cared for, and they want to be able to depend on somebody else to look after them. Then we also have a grand trine coming into that Pluto from the Sun and from Jupiter. The Sun in Sagittarius and Jupiter up here, I think it's at the end of Pisces. So this is very egoic. This is very much two parts of the ego. And again, I'm not saying that the ego is negative or bad. We need an ego in order to be able to live and express ourselves. I'm just saying that these represent the more ego sides of our personalities, let's say the Sun and Jupiter. So the Sun, again, represents what I've said about Leo needing to be special and seen. The Sun shines brightly and wants to be seen and witnessed and applauded. That's the same for the Sun in all of us. And Jupiter also would like some acknowledgement. And perhaps this combination of this grand trine feeding into Pluto here in this sign of Leo is this really unconscious need to be a star, to need to be special, to need to be a star, to need to shine, to need to have people applaud her and look at her and witness her in these really big ways. And because it's a grand trine, then very often grand trines represent an energy that's easy. So therefore, because the grand trine energy flows so easily, and especially because it's feeding into the 12th house and the unconscious Pluto, it's not necessarily something that Tina Turner would ever have been aware of. And so also with Pluto, we have a tendency, Pluto's about power. Partly it's about our unconscious psyche complexes and our wounds and all of those kind of things that are buried underneath that we don't want to look at, we don't want to admit. But if we do, then we heal and we liberate ourselves, because if we face what Pluto is trying to show us, which is in all of us to some degree as a seed form, as a potential, which then makes the load a little bit lighter. What Pluto is trying to show us, that if you face your own darkness, the worst it can get on the inside, then nothing outside of you can shake you. Because the things that shake us in life are things like rejection from others, being shamed, not being accepted, all of those things. The outside world, or not being approved of, or not being good enough, all of those things, they are all shake us up from the outside world in, because there is an underlying fear of being found out for being inherently something wrong with us, or bad or evil in some way. Because I think we all carry this seed with us, this plutonic seed, that we have the potential in all of us to be bad in some way. And so all these external things coming at us from life and relationships, we spend our lives trying to hold ourselves up against them, trying to push people away from discovering what might be wrong with us on the inside, which is our Pluto, and defending ourselves against it. But the more we do that, the more we create dependency on the outside world accepting us. And if we were to ourselves go in alone and face our own shadows, and ourselves on our own accept what those inner shadows are fully, and fully understand them and embrace them, then we will not be so dependent on things and people in the outside world not finding out, and we won't be needing to protect ourselves so much, because the people and the situations outside, they can uncover what they wish, but you've uncovered it first and you've accepted it first, so the fear is a lot less. And I think that this is what Pluto is trying to teach us. And wherever Pluto is, we also have a sense of true inner power, and we are all very powerful. We all contain the seed of immense power, and sometimes we can't handle that power, or that power is distorted in some way through these shadow expressions, and so we project it onto the outside world as a way to disown that power. So for Tina Turner, she might project her unconscious 12th house power, Pluto, onto an adoring person in Leo who keeps her in victim mode, so that she can be looked after and not have to own her own power. So hope that's been interesting, and thank you for listening.